topic, how to ensure success in RPA initiatives. What I've chosen to do is actually to take a step up. A lot of the talks that are happening are really, really detailed and deeply under the hood. And I think it's important to actually recognize that you need to look at implementation success at a higher level initially, and also understand where you are fitting into the broader organization. So I actually chose to leverage the operational principles that I actually used for my research with Norman Fall from GSB. And there are two distinct areas that we look at, and that is the culture of the organization and then the specific initiative. So the structure of the talk is going to be looking first at some high-level culture issues within the organization that have high potential to make you successful or not successful, irrespective of how the RPA initiative is going. And then at the initiative level, I'm going to highlight some very specific things that we've found to date with regard to RPA specifically. So in terms of the view of the principles, it's really looking at the market strategy, the market view, and the strategy of the organization, and making an assumption that you are wanting to become more organizationally competitive, whether it be at a cost point of view, or whether it be at a flexibility point of view, whether it be at a service delivery point of view. And that particularly now, if you're not in a culture of continuous innovation and improvement, you're probably not going to succeed in the market. I mean, the markets have become very competitive. So that's really just some background context on what's been sort of the structure of the talk as I move forward. So organizational culture, just taking a look in the mirror. I think it's important to take a time to reflect and step back, and when you are in your organization, have a look at whether you are considering and whether your environment is such that you actually are able to positively answer to these 3 points. One, always asking the question of how can you improve organizational strategy and operations implementation. Looking for dual capacity, that is one that I do talk to in more detail, because that is an area that often isn't enough capacity is invested in and time and money is invested in. And some organizations just expect these projects to happen on the sideline without the necessary capacity, etc., being included. And then also a big one is the organizations that are truly successful are ones that are fault tolerant, and they really apply their minds to being able to go out, try something, put a hypothesis out there, do it, learn from it, continue to grow. So it's quite important that those dimensions are in the broader organization, because if they aren't, you really are going to be up against it when you come to your individual initiative. And that's not limited to RPA. These are broader principles that relate to any of your implementations. So when it comes to dual capacity, and we've seen various forms of this, generally the dual capacity and the split focus is never an optimum one. Particularly in the context of RPA, you're actually dealing with not a project team that sits on the side, you're actually really embedding with the operational team. That is definitely a win if you are actually fully engaged with the operational team, and that the operational team is actually understanding what the business benefits are, how it's going to benefit them, and they're involved early. I see that as an extreme win. You do, however, if the capacity is not there and the project team is waiting, and your operational people are coming in and out and they're giving you information on a sort of on the side, one, it puts them under a lot of pressure, and two, it means there's constant delays in the project, whether it be at getting requirements, getting at a testing phase. You don't have that quick response time. So I completely understand that everyone has day jobs in the ops areas, and ops areas are pretty stretched. But having that flexibility where leadership has actually recognized a key person to be involved in the project that's really going to back and help this initiative work, that dual capacity is really important. In terms of the sustainable foundation, I mean, you probably get 3 types of organizations out there, and I'll speak in the context of RPA as well, is that some organizations, and it depends on where they are in the maturity as well in terms of an organization. Some of them just rush out, you start automating, you don't put any governance in place, you don't think too much in front. And I completely understand that that's not an uncommon way to start, because there's a desire to implement, a desire to learn, and a desire to see something in production. I mean, that is probably paramount. You want to get something in and you want to actually start working with it, and you want the operational team to actually start seeing how a bot can make a difference to them. You get the other kind of organization, which often comes more in the sort of asset management space or financial services, where there's high governance, where a lot of time and effort is put up front in terms of governance, controls, ways of working. That's a luxury often. I see more where you get, it comes after a period of time, whether it be one bot or a number of bots. What I'm talking to here when I get into the detail is really trying to talk to some of the things that, even if there's one of you or 5 of you on the project team, to have an awareness about and have it in the back of your mind, so that you're constantly looking at actually developing those things while you're going forward, so that fairly soon some of the key things you actually integrate and have some standards and best practices, so that you don't have complete spaghetti and a maintenance nightmare over, that you're having to work with once it gets into production. So I think a balance of the two, but an awareness that with robotic process automation, it can go open really fast, and you're obviously dealing with bots that are dealing with high volumes, and you're wanting to teach them more over time. So you do need to actually look at having a level of governance and a level of structure in how you're working, so that it makes it a stable platform for you moving forward. So the third thing to really look at is the concept of continuous improvement. I mean, being aware of where you act as an organization, understanding how familiar the organization is with IT initiatives. And I've seen, you've got the very mature organizations, they understand it. Sometimes the IT initiatives are sitting a bit on the side, particularly in the bigger organizations where you've almost got those waterfall projects sitting on the side. The ops people are not as deeply involved with the projects. And I do see this as being a partnership between the ops and the operations teams and IT. I don't see it as one of those projects that would sit on the side. So recognizing where you at there, understanding and looking at building an environment that allows you to learn and grow and continually learn and grow, because particularly with regard to automation, you're going to look at releasing bots into production so that they can actually start working. They do high volume work, so you're probably going to release them with not too much knowledge initially. It's like bringing on a new staff member. You give the juniors the less complicated work. Once they start becoming familiar with what they're doing, you teach them more, they do more, they work faster and better over time. So just from a culture point of view, automation is very much like that with regard to robotics. It's not something that you go and spend years building and then bring one thing to the party. If you look at all the successful companies where automation has been big and is big, it is a continuous evolution and a continuous end goal where they're working towards. So that's quite important to also consider in terms of your organization. Okay, with regard to RPA initiatives, let's get into the detail and actually look under the hood, specifically with regard to automation. So with an individual initiative, I mean, I think it's very important to be sure that it's not just, this is an IT implementation just for the sake of having RPA in the business. I think it's important that you really do understand and surface the bigger intention that the business is trying to achieve. So yes, a lot of the areas, there's major capacity constraints in the admin areas, and that is a significant driver. There's a lot of areas where senior resource within an administration area are doing quite mundane work. So they're really looking to hand that off to bots. They haven't got the capacity to grow. So look at automating that so that the senior resource can do the more significant work. But what has been spoken to a lot in the research of the companies that are probably the top 20% in terms of RPA implementations internationally are where this whole initiative is part of a bigger digitization initiative. It's not just an RPA initiative. There's a big, hairy, audacious goal, and RPA is just one part within that bigger initiative. You know what you're trying to achieve from a business point of view. You are considering the market, you are considering your competitors, and it's part of a bigger initiative. So that's really understanding that force for effective implementation, and then also using that force for effective implementation within your organizational capability to have people focus in part of that change management initiative. It is a change management initiative. It's a significant one. because it does affect culture, it affects how people work together. So people need to understand the bigger goal, and people need to understand how safe they are or not safe they are, which I haven't seen any automation where it's necessarily anything to do with trying to get rid of jobs. That's not how it generally comes about. It's really about getting more efficient and creating capability to grow their business and take on more work and take on more customers. So that's really largely always been a positive. Taking those first small steps, you have to get started somewhere, not going too big too fast, because then you go on scale. You want to go with small iterations so that the business becomes confident, because ultimately your operations team needs to believe in the bot. They need to trust the bot. And over time, as they learn to trust the bot, they will become more confident to give the bot more work. So they also learn how to engage with this new staff member and team member within their organization. And then the whole concept from an implementation success is not just doing one and then sitting back and going, okay, I've done it, that's as much as I'm going to do, but buying into the whole concept of operations improvement is a continuous journey. Bots just happen to be one of them. You're always looking, and I think in the market today, you look at those organizations that are really doing well, they're constantly innovating, they're constantly coming up with new ideas, and having that as a way of work as well with the bots. So that's really what I see as us taking into the RPA initiative specifically from a culture point of view. So just with regard to RPA initiatives, this is sort of aside, in terms of business benefit, I haven't come across anyone where the business hasn't recognized the potential and the business hasn't been in some way excited about what robotic process automation can do for them. So I've seen very little fear, actually. I think if it's led correctly and it's part of a bigger initiative, people really, really do buy into it. Teams are often, I see, over allocated, and they're looking forward to it. They're excited. They want to be a part of this change, and they want to be part of making their lives better. So it's not an area that I've generally found to be a problem. That said, I do think it is important when you have your core team, and that usually has some senior SMEs or even someone C-suite person that's involved from a strategy point of view. It is important that when you're ready to go live, you do actually embrace the broader organization and make sure that the comfort that is within the admin team, the seniors, and that's been part of the RPA, you allow your broader business team to sort of obtain that comfort level as well. Okay, this is a big one for me in that I think it's probably, when we talk about foundation and structure, other than just governance on coding standards, etc., your environment infrastructure is probably the thing that needs to really be considered and needs to be well thought of and needs to be stable. It's probably the area that we come across the most funnies, where the sensitivity and also the setting up of environments between the different areas, the dev, the UAT, the production. As you can see, it goes across a lot of dimensions. It's not a mature space. So often customers, yes, some of the customers that have been going for 6-7 years, they've got to the point of maturity, and these environments, this conversation would probably be mute because they've done all of these things already. But where customers are starting out, and you're covering a lot of dimensions, the hardware, the software, the versions of the software, the supporting applications, making sure that the way the application is in one environment is the same as another environment. Sometimes you don't have availability for those applications across the different environments, that you're not sharing applications. I think it's really important, because it comes out later when you're actually looking at doing the testing, that you really need to have segregation of space and an ability to really mirror and have your environments work the same way across the various environments. We've come across this often where you're not expecting it. You really do believe that a production environment is set up the same as a development environment, and they don't even realize, including the customer, that someone in the tech space has actually set it up slightly differently, and you get your bot into production and then suddenly it doesn't work quite the same. So I think that's definitely something that we've learned, is making sure up front you really spend the time and you're a lot more transparent on the importance to the various IT infrastructure people as well of this being standard across the space, and spending the time to double check all of that. more than once. I think triple check and probably do a quadruple check is probably a fairly good thing. It also talks to the risk within the business and the risk with moving. You get an opportunity with the bots to move between the environments and elevate code, code repositories so that you're protecting the code and you're actually working in the correct manner, and you know that you're taking the right staff member that you've trained to production and not someone that you'd half trained or suddenly hamstrung by starting to fiddle with to teach them something else and they've now got distracted and they don't work properly in production. The other thing in terms of this arena is also the role-based security. So I know when I started with robotics, you're still inclined to think of them as a bot, and you're not inclined to actually think of them as a human being with a security profile and certain access to the various applications. So getting used to the idea that actually you wouldn't necessarily let your dev user off into your production environment, you know, exactly like you wouldn't have a dev being able to fiddle with code in production, you do want to have a segregation of duty and also to be able to do an audit control on who the business user bot is that's actually working in your production environment. Because if you suddenly saw your dev bot user working in production, it probably should make you a little nervous. So getting your head around that idea that they are actually business users with an associated security profile, an associated level of access. Your dev user shouldn't have access to your production queue work, that they can accidentally start working in production when they're still working in the dev environment. So spending time up front also on thinking about those users as part of an organogram and how those bot users fit into the organogram and what level of access they would or wouldn't have. Because often those bots are getting access at an authorization level, so they've got quite high access. So you don't necessarily want one of your dev bots accidentally working into a production environment because they've usually got a lot of power, so to speak. So that is something I think that is really, really worth looking at pretty thoroughly. Being transparent, having communication on the various versions, getting the IT environment to also understand that, you know, if you're looking at the big ERP applications, they've been around forever, people understand them, they've got their infrastructure, there's a whole infrastructure team around them that knows how they fit together. This is often a slightly different space because it is new and it's more novel. The other thing that we have picked up is, because we're newer and more novel, often the broader ERP environment forget that we even exist as a project. So you will have, if there's not transparency at a portfolio level that these RPA initiatives are running, you have some other project that's used to being able to just restore information into some ERP application that merely does restores, or there are other code changes happening to how those ERP applications work. And suddenly work that you had working, you know, your bot suddenly doesn't start operating in the same manner because this other project is running. So being able to also at a portfolio level have the broader IT teams and the broader project teams understanding how one is then working, and that you are in those dev spaces and you are in those UAT spaces, and that you've got an equal level of information on sort of, you're at the table as well when you come to the portfolio. You're not this little thing on the side. And I think, yes, it starts that you are this little thing on the side, but fairly quickly, especially if you're starting to ramp up, you need to be equally regarded. There needs to be awareness of you. Otherwise, your project can have the potential that you suddenly have delays in your project because you've merely been testing and applications aren't operating correctly. You don't realize that it's someone that's changed something in the back end. So you start changing your bot because you actually think there's a problem with how you've taught your bot. So this is an area I do think that is incredibly important, worth the time, worth the effort. And it's really this is that foundation that can really make you successful or less successful and make it harder for your journey. Okay, with regard to requirements, so this is an interesting one because people think of RPA as just business process orientated, and you know, if you've got your business process documents in place, you're ready to go. RPA fundamentally works at a very granular level with those applications. You know, you're not just working at a high level process, and not all there are not a lot of companies that really have process documentation at that really granular level. When it's detailed business rules, data understanding, it's not common. So I think it's quite important that people understand that the level of work that you're at is really, really at a detailed level. You need to understand the level of variation. I think we underestimate how much a human knows, and I find myself surprising myself regularly where I think, gosh, I really thought I'd asked all the questions. And even the business user going, gosh, I'd forgotten I even do that. Because if you're driving a car and you go from a manual to an automatic, or go from an automatic back to a manual, you realize how much your brain does without thinking. You sometimes find yourself on the school run and you're at school and you haven't really remembered what you've passed, how you've passed it. It's just subliminal. Humans have got such intelligence and such a way of, if you've done something a lot, you do it without even thinking. One's engaging with that business user to understand the rules and understand how they work. And when that is one of the things that's happening, it's not that they're not telling you everything that they're doing. It's just they're not even thinking to tell you, because they do it without thinking. So I think that's an awareness for upfront, having the business users understand that, and trying to make that level of consciousness higher, that they start thinking about that. We've largely found that to mitigate that risk, you land up having to, from a testing point of view, have to do volume testing with bots, so that some of those funny scenarios, a business user would come across a scenario and go, oh, gosh, this isn't right. They'll look at it and they'll send it back to wherever they need to send it, or they'll escalate it. That bot doesn't have that. There's an element you can build in for the bot to recognize that this isn't something I've been taught to do. But that last bullet on there, those application pop-ups from often the legacy applications, those things the bot does have to have a way of being taught to understand. When they suddenly get an interesting pop-up, they need to know how to handle that and how to respond to that. So you want to try and minimize that, or at least teach the bot as much as possible to handle the majority of scenarios, and then how to elegantly exit if they do get one of the, a number of these funnies in the volumes. So I think the transparency of this exception handling, the level of data dependency, I think is also something that's worth just talking about. It's one thing if you're working with the bot as integration between two internal applications, and you in control of the data that's coming from one application to another application. The automation, RPA, really, a lot of it is used, and a lot of the innovation that happens with organizations where they really get a lot of benefit is when they're integrating and they're right on the periphery of the business systems, and they're actually engaging with a customer, some form of client. Often it's volume coming from other clients. So with that comes the issue of your dependency on the quality of data that's coming from that other company, or that person, whether it be handwriting is a whole different, I'm just, talking electronic data. If their systems don't have good validations, there's a possibility that you get some funny stuff coming through from their systems. But that's often where the biggest wins are, is when you're tackling those engagements on the edge of your organization and the engagement with those external parties. So an awareness of the quality of data, an awareness that over time, that point of engagement and building a good relationship with those parties is actually an important one. Because if you are processing their work faster and you find issues, and they're open to actually address those issues to help improve the work that's coming into you, they're starting to look better as well, because you're actually allowing them to perform better and their service levels to improve as well. So having that relationship, having those conversations, I think it's extremely valuable, and having the awareness of that dependency and opening those conversations relatively early is important. With regards to design and code, I think this is something that, anyone who's been around in IT, you always talk about reusable code, you talk about ring fencing code and making it easy. The reality is over time, you code, and then you have maybe something goes into production, and you want to add extra features, or you change developers. with big ERP systems, often that code isn't necessarily changed as much. But the whole concept with automation is that you teach the bot something and then you have the opportunity to teach the bot more. And you teach the bot something and then you have the opportunity to teach the bot more exception handling, or you start with maybe one part of a process and dealing with one specific sphere of data, and then you want to extend it to actually, once it's got into production and it's working and business is bought into it, you want to maybe extend it sort of from left to right and actually deal with more scenarios. So there is an innate desire to extend and to be able to reuse your code. So I think in this context, even though you might not have a formal COE and you might not have that investment happening in that space early, I think it's important to keep these thoughts in mind and start working on the concept so that over time you can actually establish your COE, but you also then not sitting with a whole lot of code that is really hard to work with. So having code in small bite-sized chunks, having it with single responsibilities, understanding the inputs and the outputs, makes it easier for being able to come in and edit. It makes it easier for you to be able to test. It makes it easier for you to be able to ring fence testing when you're actually extending extra logic into those subsections of the code. Definitely this area, I'll talk again with regard to the COE. It is an area that you actually want to have an established governance. You want to start having rules in place in terms of coding standards. You want to be able to have it easily maintainable. The difference with a bot and a person is the person lands up going into production and they're working and they will come and tell you they've got a problem. Effectively with this new organizational team, you need to have a team lead that actually is there, and that team lead is effectively that maintenance and support guy who the bot needs to be escalating to someone when it's got a problem or when it's not working properly, or it's feeling sick today and it's actually fallen over because there's a pop-up it doesn't know how to deal with. You still need that organizational structure is in the form of IT support, their devs monitoring. You've got those tools in place that is actually looking after this extended workforce. So it's not that program that just gets hidden. I like to think of it as little automated people that are doing work, and that there is a leader that's actually watching these people to see that they're still efficient, that they haven't had a crack and they're having a bad hair day. Certainly they don't suffer the same levels of stress that we've been suffering with regard to lockdown, etc. But there needs to still be awareness that you've got these bots and they need to be monitored and they need to be maintained over time, and they potentially need to be taught more. So you really want to set the coding structure in place, and you want to think about your design upfront and early, from reuse, extendability, and maintainability. Okay, with regard to the testing, I think it's important, and the testing when it's dealing with the bot, I've sort of changed my thinking on it in that, when you used to, testing usually happens towards the end of a cycle, and it's usually a luxury in a lot of the big ERP projects to have testing and testing governance right up front and early in a program, because it's seen as an unnecessary expense. You don't necessarily have your testing strategies implemented up early, where the testers would be going, let me be there from day one when you're gathering requirements, let me start setting up the test scenarios, let me start setting up the test data. I think it's quite important with RPA, it doesn't necessarily need to be a tester, whether it's the business analyst or it gets set up with the SME being closely involved in the project team, is really thinking about, at the point of requirement, how am I going to test this? At the point of requirement, what test data can we actually ring fence to go, this scenario is going to be tested with this data? Because it's quite hard when you come right at the end of a project to be thinking about you've evolved the requirements, because as the business user has remembered those things and they've gone, gosh, I forgot to tell you this. They see the bot working in terms of those demos that you're doing, and they go, I didn't tell you that the bot should also be doing this. Is to constantly make sure that those test scenarios and the test data is evolving at the same rate, so that you really by the end are testing everything that you've actually taught the bot to do. So I think early thinking about the level of detail. Early thinking about the test data is important, and right at a business rules and at a data level. Where I was speaking about the integration between other organizations and yourself, having those scenarios and having that incoming data in a manner that you can actually use it. Often the scenarios are engaging with workflow systems. So having queues that have workflow in it, that you can actually have the kinds of cases in it that you're able to test. It's not something that's been deeply established yet because RPA often is still quite new. Taking data from production is always a little bit risky in that there's confidentiality of data, and you need to, especially if you're corresponding or you're using, there might be email addresses, there's risk that you actually accidentally, you know, if the bot's sending emails, that you could send emails to someone that's a production user. You really need to, and I don't think at this stage enough has necessarily been thought about that, and I'm including myself, of how to establish good testing practice early, and then also from an environment point of view. And I comment about the 90s, 80s backups and restores, but anyone who's been around for a little while completely will remember when you had vSAM files and, you know, you had good old backups happening and data applications were updated in batch. And you could very easily do a backup of data, and that's what your version of work looked like. And you would run your programs and you would check the output. And if it didn't look good, you restored back to the prior state and you had your input files that you could, it was really quite easy and quite structured. One of the things here is that particularly when it comes to regression testing, when your bot's starting to learn and it's been going for a while and you've actually forgotten possibly what all you've even taught the bot, is how do you create an environment that has a base of information that you can actually have suitable test data coming in, that you can really regression test, that these things that you've added to teach the bot, the old things still work. You know, with a human, they've got that evolved thinking and they'll remember all those rules, or even we sometimes do forget some of the rules, but you're adding a little bit on, and the one's brain is really sophisticated, so one's brain works out how to, you know, pull those little things together. Underneath that bot, you've still got code and you've still got code structure. So you are messing underneath the hood. And you do need to look at thorough testing and rigor around the regression testing so that you haven't broken something else in terms of what the bot used to be able to do. Because the one thing I'm very conscious of is bots generally get given processes where there's volume. I mean, that's where the bot, if it's a really small process and it's high risk and complex and it's the same indefinitely, I get that one uses a bot for that, but most of it is really trying to deal with volume cases. So if it goes wrong on volume. A human just doesn't work at the pace of a bot. And they will generally say they've got a problem. You know, the bot will not say to you, I've actually started doing something a little bit different. It will just do it different on scale. So I do think getting one's head around how to test, how to set up a testing environment that has rigor, how to be able to regression test is quite important. I don't have all answers in that, but certainly something that I'm going to be spending a lot more time getting on top of, because as one scales, that is really important to have in place. Okay, once we've got the bot in production, I mean, one of the things, and it depends on how fast you release your bot into production, one of the continuous improvement factors comes into play with the monitoring of the bot in its simplest form. Is the bot working and the bot hasn't decided to go AWOL, and that the bot is doing what it needs to do on a continuous basis, whether it's running every hour, whether it's running through the night, just checking that the bot is doing what it needs to do and it's showing up to work. That's the one thing in terms of monitoring. I think one of the more important things that one needs to think about, and it does potentially influence how you do your business logs and how you evolve your business logs over time, is really looking at how you create data that allows you to learn about where you are getting problem data coming from external sources that give you information that you can go and have a conversation to look at either improving the external source, how it comes to you, or teaching the bot something new. So there is always risk when a bot goes live that the bot doesn't produce and do the right percentage of work that you maybe had anticipated it doing to give you the return on investment that you'd hoped for. Partly because the way the volume of data is coming in and the types of scenarios that are coming in, maybe you thought you had 80% happy path, and actually maybe you only have 20% happy path. Because the thing that I've seen with business users, and this isn't just with regard to robotics, this goes to any administration user, their level of tolerance is actually unbelievable. They put up with bad data from external sources, they work around it, they make all sorts of plans. There are not a lot of customers with those admin environments that are actually really actively monitoring and tracking timing end to end to really look at how often processes are taking a lot longer than what good should look like. When you're dealing with a bot, the bot doesn't have that level of tolerance. The bot just says, no, sorry, I can't deal with this, and I'm not going to do anything with this because I don't know how to. So the thing that I've found with a lot of customers is that they really do get to understand what's going on in their operational area to a totally different degree, because they don't actually spend the time talking to their business users regularly to go, so how's your day going? An application, an environment that's really slow, they tolerate it, because IT just says, no, sorry, it's slow. That's as good as it gets. The bot possibly in a really slow environment, if you haven't put enough time delays in the bot itself, it's not going to work normally because it actually doesn't wait that long, and it's going to give you an error because it's wanting to move to the next screen and the screen hasn't loaded yet. So you get a lot more transparent and good information in terms of how your process is working and where the challenges are within your process. So taking the time and allocating the time to actually mine a value-added business log or mine what's happening, look at how to improve data dependency, as I say, whether to improve conversations with where you're getting the information from, whether it means you understanding those sources of information better, and it might be that it's a change in another application, that one minor change can make a whole operations team work a lot better. Or whether it be looking at the capacity and going, this bot is now working 80% capacity, it's doing most of my processes, it's really time to give the bot more work because it's got that capacity to work 24/7, so to speak. So I think it's not necessarily where people are spending a lot of time focusing. You just, you're happy you've got your bot in production and the person's now up and working. But I think don't forget that there is that opportunity, and there is performance improvement opportunity and that process efficiency mindset. It's not just documenting a process and giving them to the business users and saying, there, you've got the business process, you're going to work with that now. It's constantly looking at how can you make this better and more effective. Okay, so coming to the Center of Excellence, which I completely understand that initially is a luxury potentially. But what I do think is important is that one has an awareness of what the thinking is behind a Center of Excellence, what the benefit is of having the mindset of a Center of Excellence and having a standard way of work, and creating an environment that is sustainable, creating an environment that makes it easy to extend, reuse, and maintain, particularly, from a production point of view. So a lot of the things I spoke to related to delivery itself, the monitoring and the maintaining, the frameworks and templates. I spoke to the consequences of not having frameworks and templates, but I do think it's a conversation in itself with regard to establishing a standard way of work, having standard templates for requirements gathering, having a standard way of setting up test data, having a standard way of establishing a test practice for the robotic space, how you do your coding, how you do your audits of your coding. All of those are important so that it makes it easy for handover between developers. It's quite possible that you have one project team doing the building of the bots and another project doing the support of the bots. Or even with working with a single vendor, it's not always a guarantee that the person who did the dev is the person that's available to do the maintenance on the bots afterwards. So you really do want it to be easy to read, easy to edit. So that's really where the frameworks and the templates, and try as a minimum after phase 1 of a project, where the devs that are working on the project also have learned a lot about the environment, and if you've got BAs from your side as well as the vendor and testers that have actually really had some learnings, taking the time at that point to look at establishing those best practices so that they can at least have version 1 that then becomes the way of work for their next release, and continuously evolving. Most of the RPA projects are run in an agile manner with continuous delivery, certainly not DevOps where it's doing it on a daily basis, but it's really, that's the intention, is that you're constantly improving, you're constantly getting better, and you're constantly making your life easier over time. The new opportunity side, I didn't speak today. I think that's a whole conversation in its own right. How to decide what to automate, how to decide when to automate, how to decide also how to scale in terms of the business processes that you're looking at, and over time adding more work into the bots. The risk management I have touched on with regard to environments and with regard to users, and also with regard to the scale of what the bots are doing and the speed at which the bots doing. You really need to be thinking risk and be thinking about how you're managing your broader environments across the SDLC and also once you've gone live. The monitor and maintaining I've spoken about. The research side of things, that's really where, besides at a business level, sort of getting familiar with your business processes and really starting to understand where you've got common activity and you can actually automate fairly easily, the research side of things is also with regard to anyone who's dealing currently with any of the vendors. You know how fast the RPA technology is evolving and changing. I mean, new features are coming out pretty much weekly. They're very competitive with each other. So if one of them does something new, the other one's frantically trying to catch up and deliver something new and maybe make it better. So the need to be on top of what tech is available is really significant. And there's also that opportunity where if you automated things 2 years ago, that how you automated, there may be much easier ways to do it. So being able to go back and have a look and go, gosh, I've got that staff member that's been doing that process for 20 years. Here, 2 years is a long time in RPA. Probably 1 year lands up being a fairly long time. There might be a much more efficient way and a much easier way to revisit the automation. So those new opportunities, your pipeline of work coming in is not limited to only taking on new processes. It can look at also revisiting old automations that can be done more efficiently, possibly touch more data, more cases, and improve that percentage of work that it's doing based on using newer technology that's now become available in the market. And I'm not saying unless you swap vendors, it's just that the new features in that come out constantly. I thought this was something just to sort of wrap with in terms of, and you can read it, just to ponder, is that innovation close to something as business as usual is probably not enough. You really need to be thinking bigger, be more ambitious. That's why the 20% of companies that are actually having RPA as part of a much broader digital transformation initiative are doing so much more, and the change they're affecting is significantly more because their ambition is large. When the ambition is large, there's usually more money spent on initiatives, and there's usually more focus from a business point of view, which means there's more capacity to actually be working on achieving that initiative. So I get there will be, and that's why I think it's quite important, not all organizations are in the same position. They're not all in the same place with regard to their life journey. It really, you have to meet where you're at. I think it's important to consider, though, that at a point, if you're really wanting to significantly step forward, it needs to be a bigger initiative than just let's put in RPA and let's put in RPA within the little processes that I can see. So it's not that that might not be enough for you. If it's enough for you, all good and well. But the ones that if you've a bigger organization with hairy audacious goals, and RPA is just one of a bigger tool set. I think that's the other thing to remember, is that RPA isn't the solution to everything. Automation is a much bigger topic than just RPA. You need to be open to look at use RPA where it's going to be playing to its strengths, and partner RPA with other tool sets that actually can well partner and make your end-to-end process a lot more efficient. And I've seen that with the customers, where they are thinking of it in the bigger picture, and they're not limiting themselves to just using RPA for any of the automation that they're wanting to do. Their solutions are more robust, their solutions are more rigorous, and they achieve a lot more because they're using the right tech for the right solution. Okay, just thank you very much for your time. Ewan, I don't know if there are any questions, and then just I thought I would just share that from a DVT point of view, our product partners that we're working with are UiPath, Automation Anywhere, and then also now Power Automate with Microsoft. Thank you.
No questions in the chat at the moment, but if anybody wants to ask anything, now's the time.
Can I ask a question? It's Zanelli here, Head of Automation. With our implementation, thank you so much for the presentation. I can actually relate to everything you've said here, and I feel like I've gone through it all. But one thing that we're struggling with is benefit realization with our RPA program. We're really not hitting the mark as we had intended in our business case. There's various reasons, but I'm trying to find out what approach should I be taking to see how we can realize benefits sooner than later, because we've been on the journey since, I think we started on this journey towards the end of 2017, and we still are struggling to hit the mark. One of the reasons is that we're not getting the kind of volumes we should be getting towards the bots to be able to process the work. We do have challenges with processes changing that we've already deployed. We do have application changes as well, which throw us curveballs all the time. And as well, we've had a challenge where we've seen that majority of the data coming through to the organization or the request from clients is handwritten. And that had posed a challenge. So when we first started on the journey, we had to get data capturers that would capture that data, put it in a CSV file so that it can be consumed by the bot. So then we had to create an input file for the bot. So there's been a good number of things that have kind of eroded some of our benefits, but at the same time, we're still struggling to realize benefit. So I don't know if you have any insight or input to how we can improve on this one.
I think I need to do a full talk on benefit realization in the new year. But look, one of the fundamental problems that RPA suffers from with regard to benefit realization is that when the vendors all came to market with RPA, and if the vendors are selling you RPA at a product level, they really, really do make it out to be very easy and very ambitious return on investment in terms of the happy path, and I'm not sure that they were necessarily being overambitious, but when you really get into the trenches, exactly what you're talking about, and understanding quality of data coming in, they might not have even foreseen all of those various scenarios. And that's why I spoke to the importance of, it's not a deliver and finish, it's a deliver and continuously understand, analyze, and improve what's even gone to production. It's part of the process, because things like where you're talking to data quality coming in, I mean, the functionality that's available and what was available with regard to OCR, for example, 2 years ago, and now with AI bots and the improvement on those kind of things, you might find that there are ways to actually re-engineer that bot to be able to get a lot more business benefit. So having capacity in your broader project team to also be looking at and understanding where the bot is missing the mark, and being able to look at where you need to invest time and effort to improve that process to actually get to the mark, rather than necessarily only just focusing on getting more work coming in terms of volumes, because you overwhelm yourself. The more processes that go in, the probability is that the quality of data and the quality of information coming in is bad all around the organization. And I mean, it's something that more than one of our clients has landed up saying it's been an eye-opener for them to really get transparency on that at a senior leadership level, because those business users just deal with it, and they maybe deal with it slower. So they don't have a clue, and this is not a negative thing, they just don't know because no one's told them. There isn't transparency on how much and what the error rate and what needs to get tolerated in terms of your working environment. So I think having that insight and having people with the right intel on what you're trying to achieve overall, and that's why I really, really value when you're dealing with a senior person out of the operations area that can make the right strategic calls. Don't spend time on this because actually that's not where we're going to meet the right return. Spend time on this. It's not at an admin level. It's strategic decisions on where you're investing your time and effort. You're not alone with these things. I mean, I think and there's risk. I mean, what I worry about is there's risk that people just, throw the baby out with the bathwater and go, we're not making the returns we need to. There are things that one can do, but it does talk to understanding, and I mean, extending the business logs that come out of the bot so that you can actually mine those business logs to understand what's going on. So you get insight quicker. Very important. So yeah, it's not a one answer to solve it all. There are probably a number of areas you need to focus on, but definitely it's worth the investment. It's worth looking and understanding what's happening, and then including that sort of loop back of old processes coming in and actually being revisited and improved, so that you're not just limiting it with the old tech, because the tech has got so much better. You might find that you can actually automate with a higher hit rate so that you're processing more volumes.
Thank you for that, Laura. That helps. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Zanele. Thank you.
Maybe one other question, just in terms of skills. So when we started, we struggled with skills within South Africa. So we've had an implementation partner helping us. But right now, I still feel like we're still struggling to find, senior resources in the RPA space or AI space within the South African market. I don't know if that is improving or because we've been struggling because we're really trying to build our own capacity. But it's been a slow process as well. So I don't know if there's been improvement when it comes to skill availability within the South African market yet.
The reality is that the tech is new. I mean, you've got the mature companies that have done a lot with RPA that maybe have been going for 6-7 years, and those guys, they're very likely to still be perm and embed with that company. I mean, I remember when the AI tech started coming out, and I was talking to someone at UiPath, it was about 2 years ago. I mean, they were battling to find those skills internationally. You have to give the teams and the people time to skill up. They have to learn the tech. They have to be comfortable with the tech. One of the things that people forget, and I mean, I come from a product vendor background, so I've been there, done that, learning a product and understanding and being really good at the product, both at the application level as well as under the hood. It takes time. I probably, and you look at anyone in the product vendor, it's a 3 to 5 year journey for someone to really understand the business really, really well, that you can actually know what's going on, and the under the hood tech and all the integrations and how the data works. It's not a quick journey. So I think and if you get someone that is, there are lots of people in the market that have got the base certifications. If they haven't been working with it, and it's like getting a motor mechanic that's actually just come from tech versus a motor mechanic that has been doing cars for years and different cars, and they've got the time on their hands. They've really done the work. Their insight and their anticipation of issues, the ability to recognize a problem that's coming is just so much more sophisticated. So I think if one looks at it in that context, one sort of gets a bit more compassionate with looking at where the techs are, overseas, maybe where they've been working for longer, but those guys also, it really depends on the projects they've had exposure to, the number of bots, the number of different types of bots that they've been developing. It doesn't help if you've done the same bot 100 times, because then you just know the one process well. you need to, that is where you've got to look at, and then retaining your staff is another story, because, you know, the market is still short on staff. So those skills, there's the risk that skills get bought, or there's the risk that the skills look overseas. I mean, COVID hasn't, it's been fantastic that we're now all remote workers, but it does make our skill set a lot more marketable and opportunity overseas as well. So understanding the broader environment and making the environment one that people want to stay in, and people are enjoying, is equally important, you know. And then if you get these over allocated work environments where there's the whole delivery structure isn't supported, well, no one's going to hang around, because they're actually happy there's somewhere else that actually operates better. So your whole operating environment also becomes incredibly important, because to retain the talent.
Yeah, I get that. But I'm just thinking as well, with the tech changing at the speed of lightning, it makes it difficult for the resources to be able to upskill all the time or constantly. And that makes it difficult as well to get the skill set that has those capabilities.
Yeah.
So I guess
I mean, the reality is you have to, and I mean, I know in broader tech, it's not like BA, you know, I come from a BA and a project management. It's like doing a BA social science, you know, some of the, you know, the way the mind works and the way we think, those things are relatively timeless, you know, those things are the same, but put into a tech space. I mean, those guys, Damien's on the line, those guys are certifying every year. Their certifications only last. You have to allocate and have time, which is often difficult, for those people to be doing the research and the skills improvement parallel. And that's where the organizations, you look at the likes of Google and Microsoft, and you hear them saying, well, people can spend 1 day a week or 20% of their time working on projects to skill up. There's good reason that they land up being really, really good at what they do, because they value that and they invest the time and they allow the staff, but it comes with a cost. And if sort of at a leadership level, they don't value that and recognize the benefits of that cost investment, it's not going to happen, you know. And so it is a challenge, and getting, you know, it's not a new problem. This isn't a new problem. This is a since IT came around, you know, it's always been there, on being able to have this parallel research capability. You speak to anyone that's been around, it's not a new issue. I think it's just that you see the companies that do invest the time and that have always valued that, they always do better, because they're on top of their game more, you know. It's that professional tennis player versus me that only plays on a Saturday or Sunday, you know. That difference is going to happen, you know.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was quite insightful. And I think actually that's a brilliant one, where we allow our resources time to learn and grow and skill up. I think that is something I don't necessarily think I've actually looked at. I think that's a good insight. Thank you for that.
Pleasure. Thanks, Aneli. So I don't know about the time, I haven't got a watch on, but if there's anyone that does want to pick up on any of the points that we've spoken about and have a conversation, probably this year is pretty hectic. Everyone's pushing towards the end of the year, but in the new year, I'm really happy to connect and have a conversation. This whole environment is new. We're all learning. We're all wanting to get better at what we're doing, and I'm very happy to get involved in a conversation. Thank you. Ewan, are there any other questions?
Nope, no other questions so far.
Awesome. Yes, I'll get Karen to share my details. I mean, it's Wier, LWIER @dvt.co.za. My contact number is 082-573-9330, but I'll get Karen to share it with everyone that's attended. So you're really welcome, or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, and you can message me and we can then connect through that. No problem.
Yeah, we'll definitely share the video. Well worth it. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thank you.